Funding for this program is brought to you in part by Crowning Touch Senior Moving Services.
Welcome, I'm Rose Martin, and thanks so much for joining us. This is Real Life with Susan Harf, our very favorite life coach, who's giving us advice and tips and strategies for how to navigate those things that we all come into contact with in our life and we need some help with. Like you, I cannot wait to hear what's on her mind today. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Rose. I'm happy to see you, and I'm thrilled that you're with us as well. So here's what I'm thinking about today. You don't have to say everything that's on your mind.
Oh, I don't have to say everything that's on your mind. So.
And you know, sometimes I think that some of my clients and people that I know, my friends and even myself, sometimes we go around our day with sort of the notion that somebody's got to hold up the moral fiber of this world, and it might as well be me.
Yeah, right?
And that's how we act. That's how we're moving around the world.
As if our opinions are the most important, or sometimes you feel like I just have to get it out and then I'll feel better.
Yeah, and you hit upon a good point. Most of the time when we feel a need to say how we feel and give our opinion, especially, it's for our own benefit, not necessarily the benefit of the person that we're speaking with.
That's an important thought, because you're right. When I tend to say something that's on my mind, it's for me to get it out and to say it, because either I didn't feel heard, or I want to be heard, or I just think it is really important that I say this right now.
Exactly. Well, so, at my age, sometimes I have to say it now because I'm going to forget.
Well, that's true.
So I have to say, I will literally say to someone, excuse me, let me just get this out and we can go back to what you were saying, but I'm going to forget it. But here's the thing. When we think about, it's important to think about why we do that. Because the truth is that we learned how to do this, to share our opinions or not, in the school that we went to learn how to be a human being, and that's called our family of origin. So the family we grew up in taught us how to interrupt, how not to interrupt, how to express our feelings or not. So for instance, I've spoken to people who came from large families, and they've told me that sometimes they didn't have time to get their opinion in. They wanted to contribute something, but the family was often running to another topic before they could sort of register or weigh in on what was being said. And conversely, I've heard only children say to me, the focus was all on me. I heard so many opinions about me, toward me, that there are times when I wanted the focus off of me. And so the reason why that's important in the now is because that family dictates then how you behave now in your life. So for instance, if you were someone who you felt you weren't listened to, then you might be somebody who sort of attacks every conversation relative to what's in it for me. Or it could have the opposite effect. If you're not used to being heard, if you weren't used to being heard in your family, you may now not invite people in your life who want to hear what you have to say because you might think it's not that important. The other thing about that, we're talking about families is where we learn these things, is that sometimes we as parents give our children ideas about how we feel about their opinions or about them without even meaning to give that particular voice to the subject. So for instance, I may have said to my children once or twice as they were teenagers, I think you should do that, or I think you should do this, or by the way, did you do your homework, or did you do this? And sometimes they would say to me, do you honestly think I forgot to do that? And I would say, well, let me think about that. No, actually, I don't think you would forget to do that. Well, then why did you say it? Well, the truth is because sometimes when it comes to you, I just want to make sure that you have done everything you need to do to be successful So, and I mean, when I say successful, I mean everything from wear your coat, so your raincoat so you don't get rained on, to study for the SAT test so you can get into school. So it can have the full range that we're giving people advice about, but particularly in those situations, when we do sit back, fortunately, if someone asks you that question, why do you think I didn't know? Or what makes you say that? Or why do you always need to remind me? Then it gives you an opportunity to say to yourself, well, why do I do that? And what I came to is the reason I do that is not because I think you're going to forget. I happen to think you have a much better grip on it than I do. The reason why I say it is because I want the best for you. I want the most for you. I think about all day long in between my life, I'm thinking about you, and I'm thinking about how I want you to be happy, successful, good, all of those things. So the truth is, yes, we do it for ourselves. If you want to go one step further, you might say, because I'm a neurotic mother, and these are the things I think about. And it is a neuroses. I mean, it is part of a neurotic tendency to feel like we always got to get in there.
And that's part of like taking control too. Like
Yes.
if I don't say anything, I may not have control, and then they might go and do something that's really not what I want. So sometimes we preempt the phrase with, well, if I was you, or if I was doing it, almost to give them the recipe for do it this way, even though we're trying to make sure that people are using their own mind and being creative and making their own decisions. So that's tricky.
It's very tricky because you want both at the same time.
Yeah.
You do want to encourage people. Let's say in the workplace, you want to encourage the people who report to you to make their own decisions and to go about the work. They know the work that needs to be done, but you want them to bring their creativity to it and their way to it. That's what's going to make it theirs. And that's what's going to make them take ownership of the work as well. And so even though you want that, you also want it to turn out a certain way because it's a reflection of you as well. So if I were doing that project, this is how I might approach it, is said by the person who feels both, who feels confident in the person, yet a little concerned that it may not turn out the way they want. So there's always a piece of it that has to do with your own feelings. And the feeling we're talking about is anxiety. When you feel the need to insert, this is how I would do it, it's anxiety relative to the outcome. And if we could be more concerned about the process than the outcome, then probably the outcome would be better for everyone.
That's the same in families, true. Because think about it, if you're wanting your kids to clean the house a certain way, or you're wanting your husband to do something a certain way, you want to try to make sure you frame that. So when you say we don't always need to say what's on our mind, are you thinking we need to reframe what we're saying, or sometimes we just need to keep our mouth closed?
I think sometimes we need to keep our mouth closed, and there's nothing wrong with saying, I have an opinion. Do you want to hear it? Or I'm thinking, this is how I'm interpreting this. Do you think you should? That's not the same thing as this is what I would do. It gives the person their own ability to have purview over what they're doing. So instead of saying, I would wash the windows first before I wash the rug, before I vacuum the rug, you might say, do you think maybe you should wash the windows first? That gives the person an opportunity
to say no.
To say no, I'm going to do it my way, and I
Right.
don't want to do that. I'll tell you who I said that recently to. I went to the dentist, and the dental hygienist decided to do what I thought should be at the beginning, at the end. You know that thing that they use, the instrument?
Yeah, to polish your teeth?
And then they
Okay.
polish, no, before they polish your
Okay,
teeth.
yeah.
They're cleaning the teeth, and then they clean your teeth. Well, she wanted to clean my teeth first. And I thought that was not a good idea. Now, I am not a dental hygienist, and I know nothing about dentistry. But I decided that I've never had that happen before. The person has always cleaned the teeth last. So I said, do you think you might want to clean my teeth after? And she said, this is how I do it. This is how I do it. So, okay, that's how she does it. Now, the opportunity that you have, though, is you don't necessarily have to go to that person again. You can say, in the dentist office, I'd like maybe one of the other hygienists. I really liked her, but I would like my teeth cleaned later. The point is that, actually, between you, me, and you, I didn't do that because I really liked her. So I liked her more than I liked her method, but I liked her, so I want to go back to her. I'm going back to her. But if you can choose, if you don't like their way, you can choose to hire someone else. You can choose to, in some way, provide some training. You can do a lot of things if you're the boss, let's say, or you're the peer. But you don't always have to necessarily sit back and say, well, I don't have an opinion. So the takeaway here is, in this case, is how do you give your opinion? Now, along with that, so what I'm saying is the best thing is, in terms of giving your opinion, the best thing is to ask a question. Do you think you might want to? This comes in handy also when you are the parent of adult children who have children of their own and you're a grandparent. So when I speak to grandparents about this issue, grandparents have all kinds of advice and ideas.
Life experience.
And life experience that they haven't had. And sometimes the grandparent wants to say, if he has a fever, this is what you should do. Or if you're taking him outside, that he needs to have this coat, whatever. What you might do instead is say, do you think you need to bring him to the doctor? Do you think he needs a coat? So the questions, I think, give your adult child an opportunity to say, nope, this is really, or sure, or whatever. So the question is the important piece there. But the other thing is that when you want to give your opinion, sometimes it's because somebody is venting to you and you don't really know why they're venting. You don't know if they just need a shoulder, if they need somebody to listen, or if they want your opinion. So there's another instance where you might say, you know, you're telling me a lot about this situation and I hear you and it sounds like it's a really difficult time, or this was a difficult interaction you had. Do you just want to vent, or do you want to know how I feel? I say that to people all the time because people tend to tell me things. So I'm willing to listen to the story forever, but I want, depending on the moment, depending on the day, depending on my time, but I'm willing to listen, and if they don't want my opinion, that's okay too, because sometimes they don't. I know there are times when I want to tell somebody a story and I don't necessarily want their opinion.
That's sometimes how it is with the spouse too, right? I just want to tell you, I don't want you to fix it. I'm not asking you for any advice right now. I'm just going to share with you what happened.
Exactly. And what we know about language, Deborah Tannen wrote a very good book about the differences between men and women, and it's women speak and men speak. It's different. Men and women speak differently. Gender has a big role to play when, in terms of how we speak and the things that we say and how we say them. So men tend to want to fix it. And so if you say something to your husband and you don't want him to fix it, you might need to tell him. You might need to say, I'm going to just vent. I had a horrible day, or I had a bad interaction, or I had something happen to me, or traffic was terrible, whatever it is, but I don't need you to fix it. And if you're saying that at the onset, it might mean that he tried to do that before he tried to fix it. So you don't necessarily need that. The thing about women speaking to each other is they are more likely to provide empathy and sympathy than to try and fix it. Now, having said that about listening to a story, and now you've asked the person, do you want my opinion? I don't subscribe to the notion that you just give it, because they may not want it. I also, if you're on the reverse end, if you're the person who's getting the advice and you didn't ask for it, I don't think you need to be insulted. I think the person's trying to help you. So think the best. Think they're only trying to help me. But you do have the right to say, I've already decided what I'm going to do. I just wanted to vent. Or, here's another thing. I want your opinion. I'm not necessarily going to do it. And then, if you're me, I have a sort of barometer about when I believe that's appropriate. So for instance, if someone's going to call me up and say, I would like to vent to you, and I'm going to tell you about a situation, and I don't want anything more, I will listen. If they say, I need you to recommend a good lawyer, doctor, dentist, florist, plumber, if I recommend someone, I want to know, are you getting other recommendations too? And I'll still give the recommendation.
Why is that important?
Because I will give a recommendation if I'm not asked to, whether or not they're going to use it, if I'm not asked to go out on a limb. Okay, so that's like, that's one scenario. But now if we go one step further, so if they just vent, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. If they tell me the story and they want my opinion, that's another, but I'm going to ask if they do. If they tell me the story and they want some input as far as a resource, I'm willing to do it. But now if they go one step further, they not only ask me for a resource, but they ask me to intervene. So they ask me to set up the situation. So for instance, well, the doctor's really not taking new patients, but you know him well or you know her well, so would you call her for me? Oh. Now if you ask me to do that, sometimes I'm willing to do it, but do not ask me to do that if you're asking other people to do the same thing. Because I'm not going to go out on a limb and not only make that phone call and take the time out of my life to do that, but if I use that chip, as I say, if I sort of ask my friend for a favor on your behalf, I'm willing to do it sometimes. But I'm not going to do that if now I'm engaging someone else and their time and their professionalism and all that they bring to it, and then you're not going to call them and follow up. If I find out that now you're asking 5 people to ask you for the same favor, that's not okay with me. So the crux of that thing, of that whole conversation is, to what extent do you want my involvement? And if you don't want my opinion, and I still feel like giving it, instead of giving the opinion, here's what I need to do. I need to say to myself, I got a secret. And the secret happens to be what I really think. But I got a secret, and I got to have that secret, and I've got to share that secret with me and only me. Because sometimes the person really doesn't want your opinion, and they have that right, even if they want to vent to you. So I think what needs to be clear is, what are the rules of this conversation? What is it that you want from me? And I'm perfectly willing to give it, and that's okay. And to not assume that they want the opinion that you have, and to not assume that they don't. So, you know, you need to ask the question, and then not only ask the question, do you think you might want to do such and such, but at first, do you want, you know, what's this about? Do you just want to vent?
How do you do that with young people? You talk about the family of origin, and you've got, you know, you're teaching your kids or your young kids or even your adolescents or your teenagers. What are some tips that parents and family members can do to make sure that they create that synergy right away in their own family?
Great question. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is, the more you can allow your child to figure it out for themselves, the better it is. Because they don't need to figure it out in your way. They're going to figure it out in a way that makes sense for them at the time. That may change too over time. The way they choose to do it is going to change. But at the developmental stage that they're at, whatever the task is, or however for instance, I want you to make the bed. Okay, I want you to make your own bed. The way they make their bed at 6 years old is not going to be the way same that they make their bed at 16.
Or the way you want their bed made,
exactly.
Necessarily.
So what you need to do is to remember the process is what's important there. So the thing you don't want to do is go make it after they make it. That would be a terrible thing to do. So that's, in answer to your question, that's something to keep in mind, is when at all possible, do not insert your way. Do not insert what you think should happen. If it's something that is part of your role as a parent, so for instance, we don't run in the street. I need to teach you not to touch the stove. You know, I have a grandson who's a year and a half who, when he looks at the stove, he looks at me and he says, hot, hot, hot. He's been taught,
Yeah.
you don't touch the stove or anywhere near the stove. So there are things that are in our purview that we absolutely have a responsibility to teach. But those are things related to danger, things related to their well-being. We don't have to say, no, you need to color in the lines, because in fact they don't.
You know, I was thinking as we're talking about this, the importance of maintaining peace and harmony and loving relationships too, because if you say too much unsolicited advice, or you're always putting yourself in a situation to either solve it or just give your opinion, then maybe you're creating a barrier between you and workplace people, family people, your neighbors, everyone.
Absolutely. And you know, so often when people do that, they're not trying to be harmful. They're trying to be helpful. But yes, they do end up creating a barrier. I can tell you that my client was telling me a story recently where she was on a trip and they went on a tour while they were on the trip. And the tour was given in 2 languages. So the tour guide was speaking in English and Spanish. And my client was with her family, and my client speaks fluent Spanish. And she said to her family and friends, the people that she was with on the trip, she said, look, I will, because we're not really close to the tour guide, I'm going to interpret everything for you, and I'll tell you what she's saying. And somebody in the family said to her, excuse me, do you have to be in charge of everybody, even on the trip? And my client was very taken back by that, because she wasn't trying to be in charge of anyone. She was trying to be helpful. But they wanted to hear what the tour guide was saying. They didn't want to have an intermediary. And they also loved the language, even though they don't speak fluent Spanish, they loved to hear the language, and they really wanted to pay attention to the tour guide. They didn't want her intervening. But she did it in the most harmless way, and she was really trying to be helpful. So my point is that when we insert ourselves, it's certainly not necessarily to be harmful, or to have control. But that's how it seems to people.
Was that person appropriate then in your mind when they spoke their mind and said, do you always have to be in charge of everything we do? Would there have been a better way that the person who's frustrated, on the other hand, could have handled that situation too?
Of course. I know you're trying to be helpful, but I want to hear the tour guide.
Because of course it came out just like a slam and an insult.
Of course, yes. Yeah. I really love the language. Even though I don't completely understand her in that language, we're going to hear it in English anyway afterwards. And so I'm okay with that. I'm okay. Thank you, though. Thank you. You know, again, always think the best. Try and believe that the person's trying to be helpful. And yes, there are controlling people. And when someone is trying to control you, you know it. So there are ways to tell them, I don't need that right now. That's not what I need from you. I need you just to listen. I don't need your opinion, or I don't need you to try and take over the situation. One of the things that you said made me think of this also, this point. The fact is that when you don't, when you're in a conversation and you feel a need to say what you think and how you feel, sometimes you can take over the conversation, and you need to sort of hold back and realize when you're doing that so that you don't. And one of the ways we do that is by trying to have the last word. And the last word is not important. And, you know, I have education to do what I do. And I have experience. I've done this many years. But the person who taught me this was none of that. The person who taught me this was my husband. When we were raising our kids, I would feel like I needed to have the last word, because God forbid he didn't really hear me when I said, don't drink when you get there, or, you know, make sure you call us if you need a ride, you know, all of that. My husband said to me, do you think he didn't hear the first time you said that? And I said, yeah, I think he heard it, but I want to make sure he heard it, because this is his life we're talking about. Okay. So he said to me one time, let's try not having the last word. Let's try having him have the last word. And you know what happened when we did that? I relaxed, and the child relaxed. And moreover, I think when you don't have the last word, it gives the person an opportunity to think for themselves. Now, isn't that a novel thought?
Yeah, right.
But
Yeah.
we need to give our teenagers and the adult children, we need to give them the opportunity to think for themselves. And so when you feel a need to have the last word, you're not giving them that opportunity. The other thing is that when you don't say everything you think, don't think that that means to them that you agree. You don't necessarily, you can absolutely not agree and not tell them. And again, you employ instead the secret. The secret is, I know something you don't, and it's what's called what I think.
Yeah, and it's going to be inside me. So is it kind? You know, is it necessary? Is it truthful? Almost like a three-pronged thing before you let absolutely
Very good
anything
point,
come out of your
Rose.
mind.
Yes. Is it kind? Is it truthful? Why do I need to say this right now? Is moreover what we need to do. But to remember that we don't always need to say how we feel and think and say everything that's on our mind, because usually it's for ourselves and not for them. And even if it is for them, when you don't say it, it doesn't mean you agree. So often people say to me, I had to tell him because otherwise if I didn't tell him, he would think it was a good idea. It was not a good idea and he needed to know that. Well, no, he didn't need to know that you thought it wasn't a good idea. He did not need to know that information. And as far as when you're in a heated discussion or an ongoing argument or an ongoing back and forth, you don't need to have the last word, because when you don't, it gives the person the opportunity to think about what you said. And even when you end the conversation with their last word, which is, well, I don't agree with you. Let's say that's the last thing you hear and you leave the conversation, you still end on a good note. Don't think for 1 minute they're not thinking about what you said.
Susan, this is amazing, and I'm going to be thinking about what you said, because I think all of us will realize we do not have to have the last word. And well, let's take those tips that Susan gave us to ask a few questions along the way. Join us next time, won't you? And we'll see what's on her mind again.